Welcome to Empowered, Mind-Body Inspiration. The mind is the map to wholeness, wellness, health. The heart is the key to genius and inspiration. Join me and my guests as we explore how to release and rewire into who you truly are, unique, whole, and empowered. Please like, share, and subscribe. Spiral up, spiral out. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm chatting with John Davis, an international keynote speaker, comedian, and fight director stuntman. John has traveled extensively throughout the world, speaking to audiences in 28 countries. John was paralyzed at 22 and went on to become a stuntman and perform over 4,000 live sword fighting stunt shows, including more than 100 on the front lines of both Iraq and Afghanistan. He's going to share with us how he moved from paralyzed to stuntman to teaching the skills of becoming an action hero. Let's see how this spirals out. Welcome, John. I'm so excited to have you on Empowered.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here. I love the whole premise of your podcast because it's exactly what I believe, that the power is within and we all have to awaken it.
Right? And you say that your darkest time is now your greatest gift because you were paralyzed at one point, yes?
Absolutely. I had dreams of being a stuntman and a fight director, and I was well on the way to be getting my black belt in Taekwondo, and was helping a friend unload his van full of boxes of clay. He was a professional potter. And I picked up one box of clay and twisted the side of the outside of the van and broke my spine in two. And They hauled me to the hospital, and the doctor said, you had a condition known as spina bifida occulta. And with the extra 80 pounds of weight and the twisting action, I broke my spine in half.
And didn't realize that you had it.
I had no idea. I was, lived my entire life and had done crazy things that kids do, my entire life, and never had an issue. But that day, with that extra 80 pounds and that twisting action, I just literally, basically what spina bifida occulta is that three vertebrae never formed properly at birth. So they're malformed vertebrae. And they were just kind of precariously stacked on top of each other. And the twisting action made them come apart.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it must have been quite devastating, a very dark moment, I can imagine, or months, right? And so what did you do to pull yourself out of that? Because it brought you to who you are today, which is incredible.
Right. Well, moments like that define you because we all set expectations for our life and goals for life and dreams for our life. And then when somebody comes along and tells you, and this is exactly what the doctor said, he says, we're not sure you're ever going to walk again. And if you do, you'll never have a physical career or physical life. And everything I had built up to that point was all about having a very physical life. I wanted to be a stuntman and a fight director and a martial artist. That was my goal. And it was fascinating. But at that moment, I went to some very dark places. I mean, I really thought about killing myself. I thought about all kinds of really hard things. What am I going to do? Am I going to end up being a burden on somebody else? Am I going to end up, those thought processes? And then a friend of mine came in and looking back, it kind of looks like a cruel joke, but it wasn't a cruel joke. It was the greatest thing he could have done, which is he gave me a book by Bruce Lee called The Tao Jeet Kune Do. And that book is an interesting book because it's a martial arts book, yes, but it's about his philosophy towards martial arts. And when Bruce wrote that book, he was lying in a hospital bed in traction, and he had just been told he'd never do martial arts again. So it was a very specific book for me at that time. It was very great. And I found this concept, these concepts in there about staying very present and leveraging your present moment and, choosing your own destiny, really. And what happened was I decided not to take what the doctors were saying as my belief. And I took my own belief of becoming a stuntman and a fight director and a martial artist. And I went on to do over 4,000 live comedy sword fighting stunt shows all over the world, including the front lines of Iraq and Afghanistan. I've worked in Hollywood with movie stars, and I've I've climbed Mount Sinai and Machu Picchu and swam in the Blue Lagoon of Iceland and been all over the world and done everything that I've ever wanted to do since then. But it was all because of what I learned in that moment of bringing myself out of that bed. Now, you asked about how long did it take. What happened was I started leveraging my present moment. And when I started leveraging my present moment, was I started by just flexing my neck muscles. And as I started flexing my neck muscles, then the next moment or the next day, I would come down into my shoulders and into my latissimus dorsi muscles. And I slowly worked the muscles of my back all the way down to my injury. And then one day, I actually was able to move my hips, which meant my spinal column was fine. My nervous system was fine. And at day 30, I was able to sit up. And about a month or so, I was able to stand and go to the bathroom on my own. And then at a year, I was back to what I would consider to be very normal, but not back to my pre-accident self. Because at my pre-accident self, I was very strong and very buff, and I had long Fabio hair as opposed to my Telly Savalas hair I have now. And what happened was at a year and 6 months, I was back to that same physical self, back to that same strength I was. And I gave myself a gift. And that gift was that I climbed up on top of a 3-story tower and I jumped off. And, no doctor told me doctors all told me I would never do that again. But I jumped off and never looked back and went forward and did everything I ever wanted to do.
Right. And so it had a lot to do with being in the present moment and mastering that moment and belief.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Mindset.
Yeah. Well, we only have one moment. There's only one moment that we have thought, word, and deed, and they can be active. The past is just a place where we collect present moment memories and store subconscious belief. Your past also has another goal, another job, and your subconscious mind has another job. Whatever you focus on, it shows you the pathway towards it. So for me, when I'm a person who I love Jeeps. I've had 6 of them in my lifetime. I have one in my garage right now. When I drive down the road, I see Jeeps everywhere because my conscious mind is focused on Jeeps. So I see them. So I couldn't focus on what the doctor was saying about my life. I had to focus on what I was saying about my life. And so by saying that, then what happened was my subconscious mind started showing me the things that I was focused on. We create our experience. And the interesting thing is, Buddha says, what you think you become, you create your world. Gandhi says, you must be the change you want to see in the world. Krishna said, you are the culmination of your thought. And Jesus said, whatever you ask in God's name is granted. But Moses said God's name is I am, not I will be or not I was. So whatever you're putting after I am, your present moment, is what you're creating into your experience. So for me, I couldn't create that I was never going to be a stuntman. I had to create that I am going to be a stuntman. I am becoming a stuntman. I am moving forward and creating a life of big physicality. And by putting myself into that mindset, what happens is by leveraging this present moment and stacking small successes here, that outcome is coming to me to surround my experience. And that's the problem that I see most people have is they sit in this moment and they look at that giant outcome that they want, and it seems so big and daunting, and they feel like they have to struggle to get to it. But that's not the way it works. The way it works is you do things here in your present moment that are positive and in alignment with your goal, and it comes and surrounds your experience, because when you experience it, it's going to be in your present moment. You never experience anything in the future. It's only right here. The future is just a place where we set goals for our next present moment.
Yeah. And so it's those tiny steps.
Tiny steps.
In the right direction that pull it toward you.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what did you do? You must have had days where you had some doubt. Did you have a way of dealing with that?
Absolutely. It's interesting because all doubt really is fear. Mm-hmm. It's fear that you're not going to, or fear that you're going to. And I had to figure out how to manage my fear and leverage my fear. Now, when you delve into deep spirituality, Buddha said, the secret to enlightenment is the eradication of fear. And Swami Narayan in the Vakanamrut, he would tell the story of the lion who did not eat him. And they'd say, well, why didn't he eat you? And he said, because I am without fear, he gave me nothing to be fearful for. And so the process of fear is an interesting thing, because fear, when you break it down scientifically, is just an emotional reaction to some future event that you're focused on a negative outcome of. So it's literally just negatively focused uncertainty, because you never know what's going to happen up there unless you choose to create it. And so if you're focused negative, you're creating the negative outcome. So when I look at my fears, I had to say, how can I break out of that fear cycle? Well, then I started studying the primal responses that we have about fear. And for the fight or flight response is an interesting thing, because the fear response is very simple. The first thing we do when we have a fear response is we gasp for air. I mean, do you ever watch National Geographic shows on TV?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, almost every episode has the doomed gazelle, right?
Yeah.
He's out there in the field, he's munching grass, right? And then the lion hits the field. And the first thing the gazelle does is go and gasp for air. Now, anybody and everybody in this who's listening to this podcast has had a moment where they've seen something that scared them, and they have gone and they've gasped for air. That is a primal response. That is a primal response. The interesting thing is, when people are scared or in fear, they feel like they can't breathe. And the reason the reason they think they can't breathe is not the reason it's true, because the reason they actually can't breathe is not because they don't have air. It's because their lungs are full of air, because your body is in primal survival mode, and it's literally trained to put enough air in your lungs so that you can run further and faster. This is why when you look at actors on Broadway and they're on stage, they say they walk on stage and they forget all their lines. They are literally trained at that moment to exhale and relax all their muscles. And their cognitive thinking brain turns back on, and all their lines rush right back into their head. They literally turn off the fear response. Now, as I said earlier, I actually did 6 USO tours to the front lines of Iraq and Afghanistan. And when I talked to soldiers, I said, how can you go into these circumstances where you think you might get shot at or blown up? Mm-hmm. How can you do that? And they said, well, the first thing we do is we get real resolved. And I said, what's that look like? And they go, well, we go, okay, we're going to do this. And they have a big exhale, and they resign themselves to just doing a positive outcome. They get really focused on a positive outcome. So if you're in a fear response, the reality of it is you have the key just by first labeling it as a fear so that you're not inside of it. It's now external. Second thing you do is exhale and let it go and get focused on a positive outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. And I call it going to neutral.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you're not controlled by the fear, and recognizing it is the first step.
Right. If you don't recognize it, you're in fear, quote unquote, in fear. And when you're inside of something, you cannot control it. So the first thing you have to do is recognize where you are. It's like a GPS. When you hop in your car and you turn on your GPS, the first thing you do is you put in your destination. But the first thing the GPS does is tell you where you are. Right. And so you need to look at that. Where am I? And what am I? And can I assess that as, oh, this is just fear, and fear is basically negatively focused uncertainty. So I need to get positively focused to change it.
Yeah. And that's where fear comes from, isn't it? Uncertainty. And,
right. And specifically negatively focused uncertainty. Because if you thought the future was uncertain, but you thought it was going to be a positive outcome, you wouldn't be afraid. Mm-hmm. It's you focusing negatively. And so you need to realize that you're the one in charge of that negative focus.
Totally. Very cool. And you've quoted some pretty amazing text and people. You must have read a lot in your time to become so empowered, right?
Oh my gosh. And that all started with my mom. And I got to give her the credit, because my mom had her master's degree in liturgy in the Catholic Church. And she became head of liturgical doctrine at the church, which basically meant when the priest wanted to do a sermon, he had to pass it by my mom, right? But when I turned 18, my mom told me, she says, John, spirituality is a personal journey. You got to find your own belief. And, I hope you're going to come back to Catholicism, but you need to find your own beliefs. And I went off on a real deep study. And when I say deep study, I spent a long time in India. I spent a long time in the Middle East. I studied everything I possibly could. I've read the Quran. I've read the Bible. I've read the Vakanamrut. I've read the Bhagavad Gita and the writings of Baha'i and the Sufism. And I've read them all. And what's interesting is when you dive into all of those spiritual texts, you start to see the correlations and the real universal truths, because all of them have problems. All of them have things that just don't jive. But when you start looking at all of them as a broad picture and you start seeing all the things that are in common, then you start to realize what really is true. And what's really interesting is now modern self-development coaches, Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, all the big names, they're all saying the same stuff. They're just saying it with modern terms. Mm-hmm. And, we all have these universal truths. And the number one universal truth is we are the creator of our experience. And we can create positively, we can create negatively. And that creation is based upon our taking control and doing it.
Yes. And from a very young age too, I was very determined not to give away my power or who I am to something else, whether it was a Hollywood star or, a doctor or government or a musician, because they're not better than each of us, are they? They're just people, and we have to realize how powerful we are.
Having worked in Hollywood, I will tell you that the majority of the big names that I have met are more fragile than normal, ordinary people that you will see in your everyday life. They're so worried about their image. They're so worried about their press. They're so worried about being seen. They're so worried about their next job that they are constantly managing their fears or living in their fears in very big ways. I find the concept of stardom interesting because I would never want to be one. I would never want to be one.
Yeah.
It's a horrible life.
Yeah. To constantly be watched and to be, there's such expectancy.
Right. And you can get lost in the false perception that you're trying to create. Mm-hmm. But the really interesting thing is if in this world, if you want to be loved unconditionally, you have to be you fully, because no one can love you if they don't know who you are. And what happens with these stars is they create a persona that's not them, and they get lost in their fears over it. And, I am blessed in the fact that I have literally gone off in my life and done everything I've ever wanted to do because I was always myself. And there were times in my life that I failed, and there were times in my life that I did things I wish I'd never done, but I did them and I own them and I learned from them. And I also know that even though I did those terrible things or those things that I perceived of as terrible, I have to be the one to put them in my past and start creating better. The job really is to create as many positive present moments as possible, but to also give yourself permission to be fallible at the same time.
Yeah, and forgive that, right? Because it's human. Yeah.
Right. My father was a not a kind man. He had 7 kids, and I was number 6, and I was the one he did not like, and he was an emotional abuser and a drinker, and so I had a really hard and rough time with my father. And it was really interesting because when he passed away, I had thought I had dealt with all of that already. And I hadn't lived with him in 20 years, and I wasn't around, and it just, I was like, whatever, and mm-hmm. When he died, I had a huge emotional reaction because of the fact that, actually my sister called, she said, Dad died. And I said, oh, thank God. Because to me, it was like such a release off of me, which really showed me that I was still carrying so much mm-hmm. from that life, because, oh, thank God means I was very burdened by this experience that I thought I was well over, so it's really an interesting thing is that was a huge realization for me. And I started going back and looking at my other experiences that weren't pleasant in my life. And I asked myself, am I still carrying it? And, there's a famous story about 2 Buddhist monks who walk down the road, and they come to a raging river, and there's a woman standing on the side of the river, and she's afraid to cross because it's raging. And she asked the monks for help. And there was the old teacher monk, and then there was the young student monk. And the old teacher, without thinking, without saying a word, picked the woman up on his back, carried her across the river, and set her down on the other side. And then the teacher and the student kept walking. And as they got further and further down the road, the student got madder and madder and madder and madder. And suddenly the student turns to the master and says, "Master, I've had enough. I can't. How dare you? We are not supposed to touch women. How dare you do that?" And the teacher said, "I put her down a couple miles back. Why are you still carrying her?" And the interesting thing is we carry things in our life, and unless we're willing to put them down, then we're going to have a burdened life.
Yeah. And, like you were talking about the unconscious mind, how it's programmed in those early childhood years. And that programming becomes part of our survival. And we don't even realize, how much our survival depends on putting it away and putting it in a box and not looking at it. Right.
Right.
And so it has more, but then in contrast, it has more power over us because we've done that, right? So it's just
because we've not addressed it. You've got to address your life. The other thing is that there's a saying in the Bible that I think is hugely misinterpreted, and it's "be born again." And I think it gets, and people put esoteric meaning on that, and that are just, in my opinion, wrong. But it's my opinion. You take your own belief about it. But for me, it really means set down your past, let it go, forgive it, move it on, and start something new, start creating new moments. And when you start creating your life, consciously and positively, then you'll really start to see something really change. Because as I said earlier, as you stack present moments, these small successes, they're going to drop into your subconscious mind, and they're going to slowly take over the underlying beliefs. Those successful present moments are going to take over that underlying belief. And then because you're focused on successful present moments, you're going to see it just like I saw that Jeep, right? So now you've got this treadmill back here that's creating successful and positive, as opposed to the negative and victim things that were in your past before. So it's a matter of you forgiving or dealing with that on an emotional level by letting it go, by putting it down, as the Buddhist monk would say. But realize that the moments that you create here and now in the I am moment, the word amen is a word that most people have no idea what it means. But when you ask them, it means so be it. It means right here, right now. There's a scientific theory that the person you're going to become is formed in your first 7 years. And I don't take that belief, because I think that's also a belief. That's a scientific theory. It's not a fact. Because I think we can create something new and do something different and be a different person in every moment of our life.
Right? Like, we should never take something as fact that
Exactly.
someone else has told us.
As a wise man once said, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. And if we can't realize that we don't understand it all. People ask me what my religion is now, because I was raised Catholic and I did the altar boy thing and I did all the stuff my mom wanted me to do. And I say I'm spiritual, not religious, which is the standard. But when I really look at it from, if I was going to put a label on it, which I don't like to put a label on it, I'd have to say I'm agnostic in the fact that I know there's something. I just don't know what it is, nor am I vain enough to put a label on it. And when I talk about God, I say God, universe, consciousness, and now I kind of just say yada yada, right? Because it's unknowable, and so, and if as a human mind that's so separate, if you really want to hear my belief about our experience here, I believe that what the Apostle John said when he said God is love, and when you take that and then you look at what in Sufism they say that God is on one side of a veil and we're on the other side of the veil. And our life is the struggle against the veil. And the veil, according to them, is our fears. Mm-hmm. And so we're struggling against that fear. But when you here's the next part of this is that in Buddhism, they say the most famous Buddhist thought that people talk about all the time is life is suffering. But when you look at life is suffering, the word suffering it was translated from the word dukkha, and dukkha does not translate to the English language well, because it's a broader thought than the English language can translate. So when you look up the word dukkha, it has three separate meanings. The first meaning is pain or suffering. The second one is habitual action, what we do habitually. And the third is past life experience. And so, I mean, not meaning reincarnation, but just life experience, basically. So when you put those three concepts together into one thought, life is pain and suffering caused by habitual action from our subconscious mind.
Right?
That's what it comes down to, right? And when you look at it that way, you're like, oh, now if I can just address that subconscious mind, I can put down the habitual response and lose the pain and the suffering. Simple, right? It sounds really simple, but it's a process.
Yeah, and be reborn.
Right, and be born again. Right, exactly. Yeah. Start anew.
Yeah. Right. And, I think you hit on something there too. You were talking about love, but the connection to the heart, because is a big part of creation, connecting Absolutely. There in the moment. Can you?
Yeah. Think about this, your heart, your passion, your desire, your love. If God is love and we are creating a negative world, that we're not creating in a loving, heart-centered place, right? If you're living, you have the ability to create the experience you have. And I'll give you an example. In the year 2000, I spent a month traveling through Egypt, and it was one of the most profoundly wonderful experiences I've ever had. And everywhere I went in that country, I was treated like royalty by everybody I met. Everybody they're so wonderful. But the interesting thing was they were wonderful because I was so excited to meet them, and I loved them first. That was the important part. I loved them first. So to give you an example of how well I was treated when I was in Egypt, I ended up going out to Mount Sinai, which is it's a trek. You have to fly over to Sharm el-Sheikh, and then you get a car to drive 3 hours into the desert, and then you get to Mount Sinai. And I got out there, and I walked into the hotel, and I say hotel with quotes because that's a very, very nice term for where we actually were. It was basically a one center building with huts around the outside. And I walked in, and I immediately started just talking, opening my heart and talking from my heart to the manager of the hotel. And he had a wonderful conversation. He loved us. We had such a great conversation. When you climb Mount Sinai, you start climbing at 1:00 in the morning. And the reason you start at 1 is because when you get to the top, you reach there just before sunrise, and you watch the sunrise from the top of the mountain. So at 1:00 in the morning, I started climbing. An hour and a half into my climb, 2:30 in the morning on the side of Mount Sinai in the darkness, I heard, John, which, by the way, it's kind of trippy to hear your name called in the darkness on the side of Mount Sinai. Right? Whoa! But it wasn't God. It was the manager of the hotel running up the mountain to give me his coat because he thought I'd be cold. Okay, so he came up an hour and a half to give me his coat. The next thing that happened was I came down from the mountain and I went to St. Catherine's Monastery, which is a beautiful Byzantine monastery right there at the base. All the beautiful old Byzantine art and the priests with the big beards and the incense, and it was just a great, experience, visceral experience. And I'm walking through and I'm just admiring the place, and suddenly I hear this voice, and the voice says, "Hey, are you American?" And I turned around and I said, yeah, I'm American. He says, yeah, me too. He says, have you been having problems since you've been here? I said, no. I said, everybody's treating me like a prince. He says, everywhere I go, people want to fight me. Uh-huh. And 5 minutes later, I wanted to fight him. He was putting that out. He was not coming from his heart. He was coming from his fear. If God is love, the only opposite of love is fear. And that, as Sufism says, we struggle against the veil of our fear, but it's a veil. That's the interesting thing. It's something that obscures our vision. When I try to describe my belief about love and fear, I look at it this way. Everything that you see anyway is pure energy. That's what Einstein has told us. The hand that you look at in front of you is made of pure energy. But guess what? So is the air between your eyes and the hand, and so are your eyes. And the atoms are purely an energy event. And we are created in God's image, which means all of this energy that we see is the source, is God, is universe, is yada, yada, right? And the only thing we really are is our conscious belief. And when we look at that experience, noetic science has now proven that when we focus our intention on a spot, they can measure the thought waves and they stop at the point we focus on. And they don't know exactly what's happening there, but they think something is being created there. So they're actually starting to be able to scientifically measure the fact that our thoughts are creative. And so what we think we create into our experience, this guy was going through Egypt having a horrible time because he thought it was going to be a horrible time. Mm-hmm. He was focused on the idea that these people were going to hate him and want to fight him. And I focused on the fact that I love these people and I love this country. And that's the difference that we had in our experience.
Yeah. And it's so magnetic. Yeah. And instant.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so do you choose to walk through life from a place of love or a place of no? So like I say, I believe that this energy that we're looking at is made of pure love. But we have a fog machine sitting right beside us and our hand on the dial. And that fog is our fear. And we have the ability to crank that fear up so far that we can't see love, or crank it way down and see a lot of it. But we have to realize that it's our hand that's on the dial. And if our hand's on the dial, that means we are in control of our fear, and that we have the ability to close it down and see a beautiful, loving world or not.
Yeah. And you have to be careful who you're talking to and what you're feeding yourself, like in the news, and, all the time, just be aware of, what's coming your way, because it can really influence you.
Well, the interesting thing is I find, I've been a practicing meditator for over 30 years now, and I twice a day for 40 minutes. And I love it because things don't come to me negatively anymore. And when I started teaching what I now call the 5 F's of achievement, which is basically the method by which I hack the fight or flight response and get through my experiences. When I started training people and teaching people and breaking people out of their experience, I had a woman who was agoraphobic. She literally had a hard time leaving her home because she was so afraid to go outside. After working with her for a couple of years, she took a solo trip to Africa and went up and hung out with gorillas at the Jane Goodall Gorilla Institute or whatever it's called. Yeah. She actually took that trip. But I remember in the process of working with her and getting her to overcome her fears, so trying to explain to her how her experience is connected to her belief and her thought. I remember driving down the road with her. She was in the passenger seat and I was in the driver's seat. And she was amazed at how cars merged with me easily. Mm. And she said to me, John, why do cars merge with you easily? And my response was, because I love to drive. I don't look at driving as a fearful thing. I don't put my fear into it. As Swaminarayan said, the lion did not give me anything to be fearful for because I was without fear. And so, you are in control. And so I don't even remotely get involved in what the news is telling me I have to think, because when you look at our world. So I live in Akron, Ohio, and Cleveland is about 30 minutes north of here. So let's say I had a job in Cleveland and I had to commute every day. On that trip, I would probably pass 1,000 cars every day to and from work. And maybe once a day I'd see a car on the side of the road having an accident. And that night on the news, that anomaly, that car is going to be on the news, that negative thing. What should be the number one thing on the news tonight is that 999 cars made it safely to their destination. That's miraculous if you think about it. Mm-hmm. But it's not miraculous because it's the norm. It's the baseline. Our world is 99.9% predominantly positive. but we keep focusing on the negative, and that's where we get messed up.
Yeah. And if you focus on it too much, it becomes your reality.
Exactly. Well, and I believe that in from a spiritual perspective, manifestation is that the universe is giving you what you're focused on. And I'll give you an example. If I'm in a restaurant and I decide, I call the waiter over and I say, "Hey, waiter, I'm ready for dessert. Can I have the tiramisu?" Right? And he says, "Sure." And he starts heading to the kitchen. Halfway to the kitchen, I say, "Hello, can I have ice cream instead?" They're bringing me ice cream now, but they're not bringing me tiramisu, right? Because my mind shifted and didn't hold focus long enough until I held it in my hand. We get to choose, and our thoughts are constantly changing. The creation of that ice cream or that tiramisu was based upon the fact that I was thinking something. And if I don't keep my thoughts on what I want and stay in the creative mode towards it, I'll never get it, because that's what it works, is conscious focus and actions towards until you hold it in your hand. And that's how I got out of that bed. I would not be here today. I would not have done all of the things that I've done. I left that hospital bed. As I said, I did over 4,000 stunt shows. I also became a college professor, an artistic director of theme parks, and now I'm a sought after keynote speaker. I speak all over the world doing the corporate action hero thing. I've spoken to big companies all over the place. But why? Because I'm really clear on my purpose. My purpose is that I want to live the life of an action hero. But what does action hero mean? Action means create motion, start momentum, or to do something. Hero is someone who achieves extraordinary results in service of others. So my life of purpose is all about doing things in service of others and achieving extraordinary results in their life.
Right? So service to others is also one of the keys, because it opens the heart and opens many doors. It's really interesting. So your heart is expanded, and your world has, it's quite incredible what you've done. It's amazing.
Oh, but incredible. It's an interesting word, because it's amazing. It's absolutely incredible. But when you break it down, it's like it's not credible because it's an anomaly, right? But the interesting thing is it's so amazing and so credible because all of us have the same abilities.
Yeah.
We're creating our experience every day. If you're having a bad day, that's because you created a bad day. If you're having a good day, you created a good day. Our creation is our responsibility. And when you start creating for others and you start looking at the idea, I said earlier, God, whatever he's asking, God's name is granted. Then Moses said, God's name was I am. But that quote, that whatever asking God's name is granted, is followed by a better quote that's very rarely ever mentioned. And that quote is, nothing will be impossible for you. And Jesus said, whatever greater works than I have done, you will do. It is your faith that heals you. He never said it's your faith in me that will heal you. He said it's your faith, your belief, your conscious choices that will heal you. And so it really comes down to every one of us has the same exact power, but we don't realize we're using our power, or how we're using our power. Are we using it to create a negative experience or a positive experience? It's when you come to the point of choice that you create something better. They say in the Bible, we are the children of God, but Jesus said he was the Son of God. What's the difference? The difference is that one of them claimed responsibility. One of them said, I am the Son of God.
Yeah.
And the rest of us are just children of God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that's part of the worldwide awakening today, is that each of us need to stand in our own power and take responsibility for our own lives and make the change that needs to happen, right? But it can't come from someone else. We can't put, some president or someone else is going to help us. I think that's part of what's happening today, is that we each have to.
Well, if it's all about love and fear, the past 4 years have been about people letting their fear get out of control. That's what the past 4 years have really been. And we're still dealing with the after effects of that. But I truly believe, and I have complete faith that as I said before, 99.9% of the world is loving. And I've had that experience all over the world. I've been to 30 countries and been to some of the ones that are on, war zones. And I've met wonderful people that, should hate Americans because we're there with guns, but they didn't. They treat, I put out positive and I got positive in return. And so the interesting thing is that the people who succumb to their fears are the people who have given away their power, because they're listening to people who are pushing fear specifically for their own power, and they're thinking that these people that they can manipulate with their fears are just sheep, and that's how they think of them. But if I can be the one person who says to the person, no, I'm going to love you no matter what. I could talk to anybody who believes anything. I don't have to believe the same things they do, because that's not what I'm creating in my experience. And the second they start getting negative towards me or, calling me names, then I just move on, because I realize they're too far gone. When Socrates said, when the debate is lost, slander becomes the tool of the loser. Right. Mm-hmm. The second they start saying negative things, they know they've lost, but they're going to fight. Now they're going to argue. They're going to call you names.
Yeah.
There's no more reason to debate, because they're done. Basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And just moving on is brilliant. Yeah. Stop.
And it's funny.
Giving it any energy. Yeah.
Right. Because like on my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, people would come on and I would talk to people who had completely politically different beliefs than I did. And I don't want to talk about politics, so I'll keep it broad and general. But they had completely different beliefs than I did. And I loved talking to them when they were constructive and could give me logical reasons. But the second they broke into slander, as Socrates said, the second they broke into slander, I said, we're done. This conversation is done. The second they got worse, I banned them. I just blocked them because I don't have time to deal with anything that's not loving.
No.
And I think open dialogue with somebody who thinks differently than I do is very loving, because I'm learning from them, they're learning from me, and it's an exchange. But the second they decide, no, you're wrong, you're done, and I'm going to call you a name, why waste my time? Why waste my minute?
Yeah, brilliant. And you have experienced the way you think you have taken back your power in your own health as well. Just tell us about that, because that's equally important.
Well, when my back went out, the doctors were telling me flat out I'll be paralyzed, or I will never have a physical career. And I had to take my beliefs, not theirs. Over the past couple of years, I'll tell you, this is a story I don't tell very often. A few years ago, I became very ill and started going to the doctor. And the doctor I walked into the doctor. The first thing they thought is that I had a blood clot in my leg. And he put me on all these medications, and he sent me to specialists. And I go there, and they're like, well, no, you don't have a blood clot in your leg. We think it's in your lung now. We think it's a pulmonary embolism. So they started doing for that. Then they thought I had congestive heart failure. And it was like next thing. And the interesting thing was, the more they put those new diagnoses, the more drugs they put me on. And so at the end, I had 7 different pills I had to take every day, twice a day. And I was like, going through, and I was not getting better. Mm. And then I started to say, what am I doing? I know that I am the creator of my experience. I was succumbing to their beliefs and their misinformed idea of who I am. And I say that specifically, their misinformed idea of who I am. Remember that God's name, according to Moses, was I am, and I am is my present moment. So I had to shake my I am back. And so what I did was I just started looking. I said, how can I, what is not working in my life? And I started taking control of my own experience. I changed my own diet. I changed my own physical actions. I changed my own mental process. I took myself off all their drugs, and I stopped going to all those doctors. I instantaneously. What happened? I lost 75 pounds. My blood pressure normalized. I stopped having all of the symptoms of all of the illnesses that they said, because I took control of my life and I started creating again. I got lost in my fear because they gave me the fears to fall into.
Yeah.
I know that I'm the experience. And if I really go back, why did I become ill? Why did I become ill in the first place? Probably because some point in my life I was dissatisfied with and I was creating negatively. So I brought that into my experience. But then I had to realize that I am the creator of my experience. So if it was happening, there was a reason why it was happening. And I decided to put my power in doctors and what they were saying rather than into myself. And when I took it back to myself, my faith healed me.
Yeah. It was like you just needed a little polish, like, to galvanize your beliefs once again. Right.
Right. Life is about lessons. Life is about living it. And sometimes we all need little reminders. We get into complacency. Yeah. Life is motion. And if you think about water, when it's flowing downhill, it's full of oxygen and life, and it's moving. And when you take that same water and you drop it into a puddle, it becomes stagnant and poisonous, and bugs lay their eggs in it. Life is about constant motion. So if you're not moving towards something, creating something positive, and you're not moving at all because you've decided that you can't do anything, then you're just growing stagnant and poisonous. And so probably at that point in my life, I had drawn stagnant and poisonous, and that was what I manifested into my life.
Yeah. And that's why you say action hero as well, right? Because you can have all the dreams in the world, but unless you take action, it becomes stagnant.
In your present moment, you have thought, word, and deed. And thoughts and words without action are daydreams. They're not outcomes. They're not creation, right? So they're simply daydreams. So and any goal you set without action is simply a daydream as well. So you have to put all three into motion: thought, word, and deed. And you put all three in motion, you'll create. And as a man thinketh, so is he. So if you're thinking one way and you're acting that way and believing that way, you're going to get it. You're going to achieve it.
Yeah. But it has to be aligned, right? You can't have one of those.
It has to be aligned.
Yeah. I feel like you have
cognitive.
Go ahead. Finish.
Cognitive dissonance. People struggle with cognitive dissonance. They're constantly saying one thing but thinking another. You got to get your thoughts and your actions and your words in alignment to achieve your goals.
Yeah, I knew that was powerful. Couldn't cut that off. It's so perfect, so good. I feel like you have a climbing story. I have one. I was hiking in Alaska, and we had planned to do a 2-day hike in one day because we were super fit and could do that. And within 2 hours, I had blisters all up the back of my heels.
Ouch.
Right. And I had to draw on the things I knew then, and that was to be in the moment and focus on the good. So I could only take each step focusing on the beauty of the landscape. And that's how I got through the next 8 hours of hiking. But what was your hike up? It was Michu.
Well, I did Machu Picchu, but the story that I think that you're catching in on, or tapping in on intuitively, is back on the side of Mount Sinai.
Okay.
So I was climbing the 3,000 steps of repentance. There's two ways to go up. You can go camel trail up to the last 250 steps, or you can do the 3,000 steps of repentance. Camel trail is much easier. 3,000 steps of repentance is harder. And so I'm climbing the 3,000 steps of repentance, which were built in the 1100s by a monk. And as I'm climbing through the darkness, the old expression, it's always darkest before the dawn. On the side of that mountain, I can tell you how true that is, because the hour before dawn, it was pitch black. And I had to climb the steps of repentance, which is a nice way of saying piles of rubble. Because after all these years, the steps are in bad shape. So, but in the darkness, when things seemed the dimmest and things seemed the hardest, all I could do was turn on the light and find the next step. And, but even turning on that light and finding that next step was me taking action in complete faith that the step after that was going to be there, right? And what happened was, as I climbed, I was finding that next step, and then there was a step right after it, and I just kept climbing through the darkness Just doing the small things. You don't have to look at the big picture. You don't have to see the top of the mountain. You don't have to see the mountain at all. But if you can just keep focused on the steps, you have to realize steps take you somewhere, and they take you up. They rise you up to the top. And what happens is, climbing through that darkness an hour before sunrise, finding one step at a time. The next thing that happened was I watched the sunrise over the Sinai Peninsula from the top of the mountain. And if you're willing to take the dark moments and just focus on the steps, you're gonna get there. You're gonna get above everything in the end, and you're gonna experience what you're focused on. But don't focus on the darkness. Focus on the steps.
Yeah. And you can never, like, that's such a powerful experience that you can never forget it. Like, and all you have to do is think back to that dark moment and finding the next step and trust that's how life is, right?
Right. And you know what? There's gonna be times on the steps, because it's always steps. We're always going somewhere else. Right? There's gonna be times in the steps where it's easy to walk and easy to climb, and the sun's gonna be bright. You're gonna be able to see the view. But there's gonna come times that are gonna be dark. But you got to realize that even in the darkness, the sun is shining somewhere. The sun is always shining. It's constantly shining. The darkness is fleeting. It comes and goes. Storms come and go, but the sun is always shining. So you have to realize that the sun is the power. The sun is the source. The sun is the universe, God, consciousness. And that we go into these small periods of darkness or gray, but the sun is always shining, and the sun will always come back out.
Yeah. People get so lost and afraid that they'll stay in that darkness forever, right?
Yeah. And that darkness is like, it's that veil that they talk about in Sufism. You get lost in the veil, you forget to see that love is right on the other side.
Yeah. It's so close.
Right there. The veils it's a little thin veil, little tiny thing, right? And love and fear, it's I go back to that statement. Buddha says, the secret to enlightenment is the eradication of fear, right? But then my actual favorite Buddha quote of all time is, when you realize how perfect everything is, you'll tilt your head back and laugh at the sky. Think about that. Everything's perfect, so I'm going to tilt my head back and laugh, because it's like, woo! I create my experience. I create my joy. I create my life. I create my experience. Period.
It's kind of crazy too, because when you are in that, you can see the absolute perfection all around you, like in the tree above you, and you do laugh. Like it's so joyful.
Yeah, it is so joyful, because it's like, you look at our world. We have trees. Okay, what do trees do? They take in carbon dioxide and they put off oxygen. They're giving us the air that comes into our body that goes out from us, and which goes back into them, which makes them grow. Now let's look at trees in another perspective. So trees have these little things on them called leaves, right? And those leaves at a certain time of the year will be collecting sunlight and water and moisture and making that tree grow. Another time of the year, they shrivel up and die, and they fall on top of the roots, where they become organic material, which feeds the roots of the tree, right? So it's this cycle of life of these leaves. They always have a purpose. They always have something they're doing, and it's constantly moving. The things that we allow to fall away from us are feeding our roots. They're feeding our foundation. They're feeding our strength, and they're building our experience as we move forward. And we have to realize it's simply perfect that we have that experience in life, because it's the way the world is.
Yeah. How empowering to see it that way.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the 5 Fs.
Yeah.
Is that
Fs,
yeah, go ahead.
The five Fs are what I use to hack that fight or flight response. The first one we've kind of already touched on. It's fearlessness. We talked about what fear is and how we exhale and relax and move past that. When I was on the front lines of Iraq and Afghanistan, I asked soldiers about that. How do you do this? And they would say they had something to focus on. So you get fearlessly focused. They would have an objective. So setting their fears aside became easier because they were able to focus. So fearlessly focused. The third one is faith, belief, confidence, right? And I don't care where you get your faith. You can believe that Jesus is giving it to you. You can believe you're spiritual, but you have to realize that no matter what it is, it's your belief that it's happening that's bringing it to you. So fearlessly focused with faith. The next one we've definitely talked about, because the next one's follow through, because it's the small present moment actions that you take. Now, the next one, the last one, is the one where people will sometimes struggle, and it's flexibility. As you're going through life and you're experiencing something's always going to come up that's going to seem contrary to what you're trying to achieve. There's always going to be that darkness and those storms that we talked about. But the reality of it is, if you're the creator of your experience and you have consciously chosen a goal and a target, and your subconscious mind shows you something opposite, it's not showing it to you to stop you, because your subconscious mind is not designed to work against you. It's designed to give you the pathway. So if it showed you something, you have to choose to realize that it's showing it to you to show you what you have to deal with or adjust or work through to get to your goal. You never take your eye off the goal of what you're achieving, and realize a lot of times this thing that comes up will make the end result better. Or, it'll be something that you've struggled with your whole life, and you'll be able to just simply release it now, right? Because of the fact that, I no longer need that. I can put that away. Or, you know what? I should, if I fix that, that'll help the other thing at the end be even better. So whatever comes up in front of you is just there to get your goal, if you choose that. But like that ice cream and that tiramisu, if at that moment when that thing comes up, if you decide to switch to the ice cream, you're getting the ice cream, right? Instead of the tiramisu. Yeah. So you have to stay in that space of being flexible. Bruce Lee used to talk about being like water. Water going down the hill comes to a rock. It goes around the rock, over the rock, and over time through the rock. But it stays flexible and malleable and moves with what the experience is coming at it.
Brilliant. I love you.
Well, thank you. It's quite mutual.
Yeah, you just have you're tapped into your heart, and such you pulled on some wisdom, that each of us has there, but we need to go find it and bring it back into our reality, right? And
I can break it down to a real simple thing. Today's choices are tomorrow's outcomes. Just choose positive and do successful present moments, and they'll stack on top of each other, and life becomes much easier. And that's the simplest way I can say it. Just remember, just choose wisely, as they said in Indiana Jones. Choose wisely, right? You want to make sure that you're choosing wisely and acting accordingly.
Yeah, and just pick that next step.
Right.
Beautiful. And how do people find you if they wanted to learn some more of what you're
I am simple to find. My corporate action hero keynote speaking and all is found at corporateactionhero.com. I want to give your audience a free gift today, and it's my 5F workbook. And when I say free, it is free, which means I'm not even going to ask for an email address or any. I'm not going to collect any data on anybody, because I believe today is about bringing value, not taking. So it's corporateactionhero.com/gift. If you go to my website, you're not going to find it. You have to actually use the link to get it. You can find me there. On that site, you'll also see I do a daily vlog. A piece of motivation every day comes out. If you don't want to do it on my website, you can find me on YouTube, Corporate Action Hero. I have 2 different podcasts that I do. One is called Interaction Hero, and the other one, which is my super secret spiritual podcast, called Spirit Cafe Podcast. It's me and my good friend Tamara Zoner, just 2 recovered Catholics talking about spirituality without the guilt or dogma of religion.
Right? So beautiful. And we'll include that link in the show notes so people can find the 5 Fs very easily.
Great.
And so they can find both those. We can include both those podcasts as well.
Oh, great. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on Empowered. I really enjoyed it.
I feel totally empowered. Thank you for creating a show that is geared towards that heart-centered wisdom and creating a better world, because it shows like yours, a podcast like yours, that are getting into people's ears and into their subconscious mind. So well done on you too.
Yeah, and we're all on deck, and we're going to change this world.
Yeah, yes, we are.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
John. And for everyone out there, don't forget, don't give away your power to anyone else. Be the creator of your own life. Spiral up, spiral out.